Sam Redding never thought he would die alone on an alien planet. But as he stood in the wreckage of his crashed ship, staring at the endless jungle around him, the thought hit him hard. Thick trees with twisted branches stretched toward the sky, their dark green leaves forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the light. Strange sounds echoed from the shadows, rustling, clicking, growling. The air smelled damp and heavy, filled with the scent of unknown plants and creatures. Sam took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He was a xenobiologist, not a soldier. His job was to study alien life, not fight for survival. But right now, survival was all that mattered. His ship, the Pathfinder, had been on a routine mission when something went wrong. A sudden power failure, a sharp descent, and then, crash. He had woken up strapped in his seat, surrounded by smoke and flickering lights. His distress beacon was broken, the communication system dead. He was alone. Well, not completely alone. Sam crouched near the wreckage, scanning the tree line. He could feel something watching him. The hair on his arms stood up. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay still. Running blindly into the jungle would only make things worse. He needed food, water, shelter, and most importantly, he needed to figure out what else lived on this planet. The fear of the unknown. Sam grabbed what supplies he could find. A survival knife, a damaged but usable scanner, a small pack of emergency rations. Then, moving slowly, he stepped into the jungle. The deeper he went, the darker it became. Massive roots twisted across the ground, some as thick as tree trunks. Insects the size of his fist crawled along the bark of strange plants, their glowing blue eyes watching him as he passed. Every now and then, he heard something moving in the distance, a low growl, a rustling of leaves, a sharp screech. He tried not to think about what could be making those sounds. His scanner beeped softly, detecting movement ahead. Sam froze. His heart pounded. He gripped his knife tighter and crouched behind a large root, peering through the foliage. And then he saw it. A massive creature stood in the clearing, its black and gray scales blending with the shadows. It was at least 10 feet tall, with powerful limbs, sharp claws, and a long whip-like tail. Two glowing yellow eyes locked onto him, unblinking. Sam swallowed hard. A Dravkon, the galaxy's most lethal predator. The Dravkon were legends. Stories about them spread across the galaxy, about how they hunted alone, how they never showed mercy, how entire squads of trained soldiers had failed to take down even one. And now, Sam was standing a few feet away from one. The creature took a slow step forward, its movements almost lazy, like a predator that knew it had already won. Its claws flexed, scraping against the ground. Sam forced himself to stay calm. Running was useless. If he turned his back, the Dravkon would be on him in seconds. He needed to think. Fast. Slowly, he raised both hands, showing he wasn't holding a weapon. The Dravkon tilted its head, watching him closely. "No threat," Sam said softly, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his stomach. The creature didn't react. Sam took a careful step to the side, testing to see how it would respond. The Dravkon mirrored his movement, blocking his path. So it wasn't just watching him. It was testing him. The moment of decision. Sam's mind raced. The Dravkon could have killed him already. It had the size, the speed, the power. But it hadn't. That meant it was curious. And curiosity could be leverage. Very slowly, Sam reached into his pack. The Dravkon tensed, muscles coiling. Before it could react, Sam pulled out one of his emergency rations, a small protein-packed food bar. Carefully, he unwrapped it and held it out. The Dravkon narrowed its glowing eyes. It sniffed the air. Then, with a low growl, it took another step closer. Sam didn't move. The Dravkon stopped just a few feet away, staring at him. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a sharp huff, The creature turned and disappeared into the jungle, its massive form vanishing as if it had never been there. Sam exhaled slowly. He was still alive. But something told him this wasn't the last time he would see that predator. And next time, it might not walk away so easily. The jungle was alive with unseen dangers. Sam Redding moved carefully through the thick undergrowth, his knife gripped tightly in one hand. Every step had to be precise. One wrong move, one careless noise, and he could attract the attention of something far worse than he had already encountered. The Dravkhan. Even now, hours after the encounter, his mind replayed the scene, the way the towering predator had watched him, testing him, studying him. It could have killed him in an instant, but it hadn't, and that unsettled him more than anything. The Dravkhan were the galaxy's most lethal hunters. Stories spoke of their brutal efficiency, their unmatched strength. They didn't show mercy. They didn't show curiosity. So why had that one spared him? Sam pushed the thought aside. He needed to focus on surviving the night. The sun, if that's what it was dipping below the horizon, and the jungle was growing darker. He had to find shelter. The night brings new dangers. The sounds around him shifted as the light faded. The distant chirps and rustles of small creatures disappeared, replaced by something more ominous. Low, guttural growls. Heavy footfalls. The sound of predators waking up. Sam's pulse quickened. He had to move faster. Then he found it. A small cave tucked into the side of a rocky hill. The entrance was just big enough for him to squeeze through, but not large enough for anything too big to follow. It would have to do. He crawled inside and sat against the wall, letting out a slow breath. The space was cramped, but it felt safer than being out in the open. Still, he wasn't foolish. Nowhere was truly safe here. He reached into his pack and pulled out his fire starter. A few sparks, and soon, a small flame flickered to life. The fire's warm glow pushed back the darkness, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. For the first time since the crash, Sam allowed himself a moment to rest. His body ached, his mind was exhausted, but he had survived the first day. That counted for something. Or so he thought. Something is watching. A low sound rumbled through the jungle. Deep, powerful, close. Sam's muscles tensed. He knew that sound. The Dravkhan. Slowly, he reached for his knife, keeping his breathing steady. The fire crackled beside him, its light flickering across the cave walls. Then, from the shadows just beyond the fire's glow, two glowing yellow eyes appeared. Sam's heart pounded. The Dravkhan was back. The massive creature stood just outside the cave, its black and gray scales blending into the darkness. It didn't move, didn't growl. It simply watched. Sam didn't speak, didn't reach for anything else. He simply held his ground, keeping his eyes locked on the predator. For a long moment, the two stared at each other, neither making a move. Then, to Sam's shock, the Dravkhan stepped closer. A test of strength. The firelight flickered across the predator's muscular frame as it moved. It ducked slightly, its large shoulders shifting, its claws scraping against the rocky ground. Sam knew enough about animal behavior to understand what was happening. The Dravkhan was testing him. Would he run? Would he fight? Would he cower? Sam did none of those things. Instead, he did something crazy. He grabbed a stick from the ground, held it over the fire until the tip was burning, and then lifted it toward the Dravkhan, not as a threat, but as a signal. The Dravkhan's yellow eyes narrowed. Fire. It recognized fire. Sam had read reports from other worlds. Many predators feared fire. But this one, it didn't back away. It watched. Then, to Sam's complete disbelief, it sat down. Sam's breath caught in his throat. The most feared predator in the galaxy was sitting in front of him, calm, patient, as if studying him. "What are you doing?" Sam muttered under his breath. The Dravkhan tilted its head, almost as if it had heard him. The unspoken challenge. For the next few minutes, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the Dravkhan did something unexpected. It reached down and scraped its claws against the ground, leaving deep marks in the dirt. A message. A challenge. Sam wasn't sure if it was instinct or insanity, but he found himself reaching for a small rock. He dragged it across the dirt beside him, mimicking the motion. The Dravkhan rumbled low in its throat, a sound that wasn't quite a growl, but not quite anything else either. A response. Sam's mind raced. This wasn't just a beast. It wasn't acting on pure instinct. It was intelligent. The Dravkhan stood, towering over him once more. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Sam sat frozen, staring at the empty space where it had been. It had come to test him. It had come to see what he would do. And now it had left, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. Sam exhaled. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Excitement. He had survived another night. But more than that, he had just made first contact with something the galaxy believed was untenable. And deep down, Sam knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Sam Redding woke to the sound of the jungle stirring, the deep hum of distant creatures, the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze, and the faint dripping of moisture from the trees above. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories returned, the crash, the deadly planet, and the Dravkhan. Sam sat up quickly, scanning the jungle outside his cave. The fire had burned low, leaving behind smoldering embers. The air was cool, but the jungle never truly rested. And neither did the predator that had watched him last night. He hadn't imagined it. The Dravkhan had come back, not to hunt him, not to kill him, but for something else. Sam exhaled and rubbed his face. If he wanted to survive, he needed to understand why. Survival is a language. Stepping outside, Sam checked his surroundings. No sign of the Dravkhan, but he knew it was still out there. Watching. Waiting. He had to be ready. His supplies were running low. He had some emergency rations, but those wouldn't last forever. He needed real food. Water was his first priority. He had seen a small stream the day before, but it meant leaving the safety of his cave. With his knife in hand, Sam made his way through the jungle, stepping carefully over thick roots and tangled vines. Every noise made him pause. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Then he saw it. The stream. Clear, flowing water. Relief washed over him as he crouched down and filled his hands, drinking deeply. The cool water eased the dryness in his throat, and for the first time since the crash, he felt a small sense of control. But control was an illusion, because he wasn't alone. A silent observer, a sound, a soft breath, a shift of weight on the forest floor. Sam turned his head slowly. The Dravkhan stood a few feet away, its massive form blending into the jungle. Sam's heartbeat quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. No sudden movements. No fear. The Dravkhan didn't attack. It just watched. Its yellow eyes locked onto him, studying every motion, every breath. Sam let the moment stretch. Then, carefully, he reached down, scooped another handful of water, and drank. The Dravkhan's eyes flicked to the water. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, the predator moved closer. It lowered its massive head, sniffed the air, then dipped its clawed fingers into the stream. Sam held his breath. The Dravkhan lifted its hand and watched as the water dripped between its claws. Understanding dawned on Sam. It wasn't just watching. It was learning. A mutual understanding. The Dravkhan made a low sound, almost like a growl, but there was no threat in it. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Sam exhaled sharply, his hands still trembling. This was not normal behavior for a predator. The Dravkhan should have killed him, should have seen him as weak. But instead, it had observed him. It had chosen not to attack. And in the world of survival, that meant something. Sam knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary beast. This was something far more intelligent. An unlikely rescue. Sam spent the next few hours gathering supplies, edible plants, small fruits, anything he could use. But as he made his way back to the cave, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A snarl. It wasn't the Dravkhan. This was different. Sam slowly crept forward and peered through the thick jungle. His breath caught. The Dravkhan was in trouble. A second predator, smaller but just as deadly looking, was circling it. The two creatures faced off, muscles tensed, claws digging into the dirt. Sam could see the Dravkhan's side. A deep wound was bleeding. It had fought something earlier, and now it was vulnerable. The smaller predator lunged. The Dravkhan dodged but stumbled slightly. It wasn't fast enough. Sam's mind raced. He knew he shouldn't interfere. But before he could think twice, his body moved. Grabbing a heavy branch from the ground, he charged. The second predator, startled by the sudden noise, hesitated for just a second. But that was enough. The Dravkhan took its chance. It lashed out with its claws, striking deep. The smaller creature let out a piercing screech before collapsing. Silence. Sam stood frozen, heart hammering. He had just helped a Dravkhan. What had he done? A predator's decision. The Dravkhan turned toward Sam, its yellow eyes burning with intensity. Sam tensed. He had no escape, no chance to run. Then something unexpected happened. The Dravkhan lowered its head. Not in submission, not in weakness, but in acknowledgement. Sam felt a strange sense of realization settle over him. He wasn't just prey anymore. He was something else, something the Dravkhan had never encountered before. And for the first time, Sam didn't feel alone. This was only the beginning. Sam Redding stood frozen, his breath shallow. The Dravkhan had lowered its head toward him, not as a predator about to strike, not as an enemy, but as something else. Sam swallowed hard. The most feared hunter in the galaxy was standing just a few feet away, watching him with those glowing yellow eyes, a creature of raw power and unmatched skill. Yet it had chosen not to attack him, and Sam had just saved its life. He wasn't sure if the Dravkhan understood the meaning of gratitude, but something in its posture, something in the way it looked at him now, told Sam that this moment was important. The predator's wound. Sam's eyes drifted to the deep wound on the Dravkhan's side. Dark blood oozed from the gash, staining its black and gray scales. It had fought something dangerous before facing that smaller predator, and now it was injured. Sam exhaled slowly. He knew what he had to do. Helping this creature was madness. It could turn on him in an instant, but if he let it bleed out, then all of this, everything that had happened between them, would be for nothing. He took a cautious step forward. The Dravkhan didn't move. Sam knelt, slowly reaching into his pack. He pulled out a small medkit, one of the few things that had survived the crash. Inside was a disinfectant, some bandages, and a small surgical needle. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. "This is a bad idea," he muttered under his breath. The Dravkhan let out a low rumble, watching his every move. Sam dipped the cloth in disinfectant, then carefully reached toward the wound. The second his hand made contact with the Dravkhan's scales, a deep growl rumbled from its throat. Sam froze. For a moment, he thought it would attack. His fingers twitched toward his knife. But then, after a few tense seconds, the growl faded. The Dravkhan had allowed it. Sam worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best as he could. The Dravkhan flinched a few times, but didn't lash out. It was tolerating him. And that in itself was incredible. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and exhaled. "There," he muttered. "That's the best I can do." The Dravkhan stared at him, its yellow eyes unreadable. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it stood. Sam tensed, preparing for the worst. But instead of attacking, instead of running, the Dravkhan turned and walked away, disappearing into the jungle once more. Sam sat there, stunned. A dangerous trust. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. Sam spent his time gathering food, strengthening his shelter, and keeping watch. He didn't know if the Dravkhan would return. Part of him wasn't sure if he wanted it to. Yet, something inside him knew the truth. This planet was deadly. And in a place like this, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about alliances, even impossible ones. And so, when Sam saw the Dravkhan again, he wasn't surprised. One evening, just as the sun was setting, he spotted it near the trees. It was standing still, watching him. The wound on its side looked better, not fully healed, but no longer bleeding. Sam locked eyes with it, waiting. The Dravkhan didn't move. Neither did Sam. A silent understanding passed between them. Then, the Dravkhan did something unexpected. It dropped something on the ground. Sam's brow furrowed. He stepped closer and looked down. It was food. A small, fresh kill. Sam stared at the dead creature, then back at the Dravkhan. His mind raced. Was this a test? A warning? A message? Or was it an offering? Sam's fingers twitched. He reached down, picked up the kill, and gave the Dravkhan a slow nod. The predator let out a soft, almost approving growl before turning and vanishing into the trees once again. Sam exhaled. He wasn't sure what they were now, but one thing was clear: they were no longer enemies. The night hunt. Days passed, and the strange, silent bond between them grew. The Dravkhan returned again and again, watching, observing. Sometimes it brought food. Sometimes it just watched him work. But it never attacked. And then, one night, something changed. Sam was preparing his fire when he heard a low growl behind him. He turned to see the Dravkhan standing closer than ever before. Something about its posture was different. Alert. Focused. It turned its head toward the jungle and let out a deep, vibrating sound. A warning. Sam's muscles tensed. Something was out there. He grabbed his knife and crouched low, listening. Then he heard it. The snap of a branch. The slow, heavy breathing of something massive. The Dravkhan shifted its weight, lowering itself into a hunting stance. And then it did something that chilled Sam to the bone. It let out a sharp, controlled growl, directed at him. Sam's breath caught. It wasn't a threat. It was an order. A command to follow. The Dravkhan wanted him to hunt together. Sam hesitated. This was insane, completely insane. But deep down, he knew, if he refused, he might not survive the night. Taking a slow, steady breath, he gripped his knife and stepped forward. The Dravkhan let out a satisfied rumble and turned toward the jungle, disappearing into the darkness. Sam followed. Whatever was waiting for them in the night, they would face it together. Sam Redding moved through the dense jungle, his heart pounding. The Dravkhan led the way, its massive body silent despite its size. Every movement was precise, controlled, a true predator in its element. Sam wasn't so lucky. His steps weren't as quiet. The jungle floor was covered in thick roots, fallen leaves, and hidden dangers. He did his best to follow the Dravkhan's lead, keeping his knife ready. He still wasn't sure if this was insanity or survival. Why had the Dravkhan asked him to hunt together? He didn't know, but refusing hadn't been an option. And now something was out there. Something big. Something dangerous. The invisible threat. The jungle was too quiet. No distant animal calls. No rustling in the trees. Even the insects had gone silent. Sam had spent enough time in the wild to know what that meant. A predator was near. The Dravkhan suddenly stopped. Sam froze. The creature lifted its head, its yellow eyes scanning the darkness. It inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring. Then it let out a low growl. A warning. Sam tightened his grip on the knife. His eyes darted around, searching the thick jungle for movement. And then he saw it. Something huge moved between the trees. Its body was almost invisible, blending into the shadows. Only the faintest shimmer of movement gave it away. Camouflage. Sam barely had time to react before the creature lunged. The battle in the dark. Sam dove aside, rolling over the rough ground as the massive predator crashed into the spot where he had just been standing. The Dravkhan roared and met the attacker head-on. Now Sam could see it clearly. A shadow beast. He had heard stories of them before. Apex predators. Silent killers. Their bodies were covered in a shifting, light-absorbing skin that made them nearly invisible in the dark. And this one was hungry. The Dravkhan slashed with its claws, but the shadow beast was fast. It twisted its body, dodging the blow, and struck back with a whip-like tail. The impact sent the Dravkhan crashing into a tree. Sam knew he had seconds to act. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible. But something inside him refused. He wasn't just prey anymore. He wasn't alone. The Dravkhan had fought by his side before, and now it needed him. So Sam did something unbelievably reckless. He attacked. A human's gamble. Sam lunged forward, using the element of surprise. The shadow beast didn't expect a second attacker. With all his strength, he drove his knife into its side. The blade barely sank in before the creature let out a horrible screech and twisted violently. Sam was thrown back, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to move. The Dravkhan recovered fast. It took advantage of the distraction, tearing into the shadow beast with its claws. Dark blood sprayed across the jungle floor. The shadow beast shrieked and tried to escape, but the Dravkhan didn't let it go. With one final powerful bite, the battle was over. The shadow beast collapsed. The jungle went still. Sam lay on the ground, breathing hard. His body ached, but he was alive. And so was the Dravkhan. Slowly, he sat up. The massive predator stood over the fallen creature, its yellow eyes still burning with the thrill of the hunt. Sam swallowed. Would it turn on him now? Would it decide that he was the weaker prey? Instead, the Dravkhan looked at him. Then it did something completely unexpected. It nodded. The mark of a pack. Sam didn't move. He just stared. Had that really just happened? Had the Dravkhan just acknowledged him, like he was one of its own? He let out a shaky breath and climbed to his feet. His legs felt weak, but he ignored the pain. The Dravkhan stepped aside, revealing the dead shadow beast. Sam understood the message. This wasn't just a hunt. This was a test, a challenge. And he had proven himself. Sam wiped his bloody hands on his pants and gave the Dravkhan a slow nod in return. A silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just survival anymore. They were more than just two creatures stranded on a deadly planet. They were something else now. Something stronger. A pack. And in a universe where only the strongest survived. That meant everything. Sam Redding sat beside the fallen shadow beast, his breathing still unsteady. His body ached from the fight, and his hands were stained with blood. Some of it his own, most of it from the predator they had just taken down. Beside him, the Dravkhan stood tall, its yellow eyes scanning the dark jungle. It didn't move like a creature that had just fought a deadly battle. It moved like a king, calm, in control, unshaken. Sam, on the other hand, felt like his bones were made of glass. He exhaled slowly and wiped his hands on his shirt. The air smelled of blood. Even though the jungle was still silent, Sam knew that wouldn't last. Other predators would come soon. The scent of a fresh kill would draw them in like a beacon. The Dravkhan seemed to know it too. It let out a low growl and stepped forward, gripping the shadow beast's corpse with its powerful claws. Then, with almost effortless strength, it began to drag the carcass through the jungle. Sam hesitated for only a moment before following. They had hunted together. Now, they would feast together. A predator's feast. The Dravkan led Sam to a small clearing surrounded by large, twisted trees. The ground was dry here, safe from the damp jungle floor. With a final push, the Dravkan dropped the carcass and let out a satisfied grunt. Then, it turned its gaze toward Sam. The meaning was clear. Eat. Sam hesitated. The idea of eating raw alien meat wasn't exactly appetizing. But he didn't have much choice. His own supplies were running low, and he hadn't seen any edible plants nearby. He pulled out his knife and got to work. The Dravkan watched as he cut strips of meat, its head tilting slightly, curious. Sam wasn't a predator like it. He had no fangs, no claws. But he had fire. After collecting some dry wood, he struck his survival knife against a flint stone. Sparks flew, catching the dried leaves. Within minutes, a small fire flickered to life. The Dravkan's eyes widened slightly. It let out a soft, almost thoughtful growl. Sam smirked. Yeah, bet you've never seen that before. The predator watched as Sam skewered the meat onto a sharpened stick and held it over the flames. The smell of cooking flesh filled the air. The Dravkan rumbled again and tore a chunk of raw meat from the shadow beast's body. It chewed slowly, still keeping its eyes on Sam. They ate together, side by side. Predator and prey, warrior and survivor. Something ancient had been forged between them. A growing understanding. After the meal, Sam leaned back against a tree, staring up at the night sky. The stars above looked the same as they had before his ship crashed. But he wasn't the same. The Dravkan lay nearby, its body stretched out, breathing slow and deep. It wasn't asleep. It never fully let its guard down. But it was at ease. Sam wasn't sure how much intelligence the Dravkan had, but it wasn't just a beast. It had chosen not to kill him. It had shared a hunt. And now it had shared a meal. Sam let out a small chuckle. If I ever get off this planet, nobody's gonna believe this. The Dravkan flicked an ear in his direction, but didn't move. Sam's smile faded slightly. Getting off this planet. That was still the goal. He couldn't stay here forever. No matter how strong their bond was, no matter how much he respected the Dravkan, he was still human. And humans weren't meant to stay on death worlds. The unseen enemy. Just as Sam was about to close his eyes, the Dravkan suddenly lifted its head. A low, warning growl rumbled from deep in its chest. Sam tensed. He reached for his knife, scanning the darkness beyond the fire's glow. Then he heard it. A mechanical whir. His blood ran cold. Not an animal. Not a predator. Something else was out there. Something unnatural. The Dravkan rose to its feet, muscles tensed, tail flicking in irritation. It was ready to fight. Sam narrowed his eyes and peered into the trees. Then he saw them. Machines. Sleek, insect-like drones, hovering just beyond the firelight. Their dark metal bodies blended with the jungle, but their glowing red eyes betrayed them. Sam's stomach twisted. Not scavengers. Not wild beasts. These were something else, and he had a very, very bad feeling about them. The true hunters arrive. Before Sam could move, one of the drones darted forward. The Dravkan reacted instantly, lunging with a snarling roar. Its claws met metal, and the drone shattered against a tree. But there were more. A dozen red eyes blinked in the shadows. Sam clenched his jaw. This isn't random. Someone had sent these. Someone was watching. The Dravkan let out a furious battle cry. Sam gritted his teeth. His knife wouldn't do much against metal, but he wasn't going to run. Not now. Not after everything. With a deep breath, he stepped beside the Dravkan, ready to face whatever was coming. Because whatever these machines were, they had just made a very big mistake. The jungle was no longer silent. The air was filled with the whirring of machines, the red glow of their sensors flickering like hungry eyes in the dark. Sam could feel the tension in his chest, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Beside him, The Dravkon stood tall, muscles tensed, claws digging into the dirt. Its yellow eyes gleamed with a fierce determination. They were outnumbered, but neither of them had any intention of running. The first drone lunged, moving faster than anything Sam had ever seen. But the Dravkon was faster. But there were more coming. He needed to think. He needed a plan. The fire's advantage. Sam's eyes flicked to the fire still burning behind them. That was it. He grabbed a burning branch, ignoring the heat licking at his fingers. The drones were fast, strong, but they were made of metal. And metal had weaknesses. He swung the torch at the nearest drone. The flame caught on something, maybe a fuel line, maybe an exposed wire, and the machine burst into sparks. The Dravkon didn't hesitate. The moment the drone faltered, it ripped it apart. Sam grinned. Fire works. But they still had 10 more to deal with. The enemy's true face. The drones hesitated, forming a loose circle around them. Then, a sound echoed through the jungle. A mechanical voice. Target located. Human confirmed. Engage capture protocol. Sam's stomach twisted. This wasn't a random attack. Someone was looking for him. Someone had sent these machines to take him alive. But why? He barely had time to think before the drone struck again. A desperate fight. The battle became a blur of motion. Sam dodged, using the fire as a weapon. He struck at anything that got too close, forcing the machines to keep their distance. The Dravkon fought like a storm of claws and teeth, moving faster than Sam thought possible. For every drone they destroyed, 2 more pushed forward. Sam's arms ached. His body screamed for rest. But he couldn't stop. Because stopping meant losing. And losing meant capture. Then he heard it. A deep hum in the distance. Something bigger was coming. The hunter arrives. The trees shook as a massive shape emerged from the jungle. It was twice the size of the drones, its body sleek and armored, its glowing red visor locked onto Sam. A hunter. A machine built for war. It raised an arm, and Sam saw the weapon attached to it. A stun cannon. If that thing hit him, he wouldn't even have the chance to fight. He'd be taken instantly. The Dravkon let out a deep warning growl. Its fur bristled, its body lowering into a battle stance. Sam's mind raced. Think, think, think. Then he saw something. The fire. And the shadow beast's body still lying nearby. An idea flashed through his mind. It was crazy. It was reckless. It was their only shot. A dangerous plan. Sam turned to the Dravkon. I need you to trust me. The Dravkon blinked, tilting its head slightly. No time to explain. Sam grabbed the torch and ran straight toward the shadow beast's body. He plunged the torch into the corpse, setting the fur alight. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh. The effect was immediate. The jungle reacted. From the darkness beyond, deep, guttural growls echoed through the trees. Sam had just sent a signal. The real predators of this world were about to arrive. The hunter drone hesitated. Too late. The jungle exploded with movement. The wrath of the jungle. Eyes glowed in the darkness. Huge, scaled bodies slithered from the shadows. Massive winged creatures swooped down from above. A dozen deadly predators had smelled the burning flesh, and they had come to claim it. The jungle turned into chaos. The drones were overwhelmed, metal bodies crushed under monstrous jaws. The hunter drone fired wildly, but it couldn't hold them all back. The Dravkon didn't wait. It lunged at the hunter drone, its claws tearing through its armor. Sparks flew. Circuits were shredded. The machine collapsed, its glowing red visor flickering before going dark. Sam stood frozen, breathing hard. They had won. They had survived. The final choice. As the last drones were devoured, the jungle grew quiet again. The Dravkon turned to Sam, eyes unreadable. They had fought together. They had survived together. But now, the moment had come. Sam looked up at the sky. He knew that whoever had sent those machines wouldn't stop looking for him. He still had to get off this planet. But when he looked back at the Dravcon, he knew something else. He wasn't leaving alone. With a small smile, he reached out a hand. The Dravcon hesitated, just for a second. Then, it lowered its head and touched its forehead to his palm. A silent promise. A bond that couldn't be broken. Man and beast. Predator and survivor. Together, they would face whatever came next.